again, the climate change guys want to tell us what we can eat, what we can't eat. They want to have our phone have some app that tells us when we've used up our carbon allocation for the year or for the month, and you can no longer buy steak because you've used too much carbon. These are people, there's polls that say that something like 60% of college kids nowadays are basically socialists. They have no understanding of what socialism has done throughout history. Not a shred of an understanding of how not only has it not worked, but it kills people by the countless numbers. Now, capitalism has bad days, but usually that's when capitalism is turning into socialism, right? Or fascism, actually. So when capitalism goes bad, it turns into fascism because they commandeer the machinery of government, and then they go destroy the hodlers.
All right, guys, bang, bang. I have Mr. Dave Collum back again. It's going to be a spicy conversation, as I think we've had multiple times. But Dave, I thought the first place that we could start with your year in review is on the financial markets. You've got all the weird stuff. You got the conspiracy theories. You got all the craziness in there, just like every other year. But the financial markets really, I think, tell a story that weaves many of these other things in there together. And what a lot of people may not know about you is you had this epic investing run up until about 2009. And then you started to change your mind about how financial markets worked, about assets that maybe you wanted exposure to or didn't want exposure to. Help us understand over the last couple of decades, like, how has your thought process about investing, and especially the macro market, changed? And then how is that being expressed today in the portfolio?
So I actually should preface this with one of the most cutting emails I got after publishing this thing. I get a lot of support from a good friend who's a famous money manager in Europe, and he said, I think you've lost your edge in investing, and I think it's because you're focusing on all that other crap. And what I think he has backwards is two things. One is that I'm hunkered down for the apocalypse, and so if I can get a 6% return, then I consider a huge win because I'll take 6% all day for the time being. Where what I do will either work or not is when we do have the next serious downturn, which I think is going to be a whopper, and how I do during that, right? That'll determine whether I've been smart or stupid. But he also has it backwards in the sense that I'm sitting on my hands like crazy, right? So I've got my position, and now I'm just waiting for the markets to game day to start. And so what do? Well, I focus on the other crap. And that's the way it's. What else am I going to read? I can read all the overvaluation crap I want, and it's not going to change my mind at this point. I'm just waiting for the recession and the serious sell-off and what I think will be exceedingly painful period. So in any event, by way of investing, I started out 100% bonds 1980. And there's people say, well, it would have been nice to be in equities. Well, bonds had about a 12 to 15% return for that decade. So it by no means was a bad move. 87 crash. I was chatting with a senior colleague in the coffee room, and we were talking about it. And he said, and I knew nothing about investing. When I was a kid, I thought I wanted to go to Wall Street, but I'd long since not paid attention. And he said, you ought to own equities. And I sort of looked at it, I said, you're right. So post 87 crash, I moved heavily into equities. And I was a raging tech bull, which is incomprehensible to the people who know me now. Incomprehensible. And I was buying, I didn't buy .coms. I looked at eBay, did some math and said, no, it's overvalued too much. But I own Dell and I own WorldCom. I got into WorldCom when it was a tiny little company in Mississippi, and I got out in 99. So that was quite a feat. That turned out to be just sort of raw luck. I was fear of the markets. So in any event, I became a tech bull probably in the early 90s. And I really believed. I mean, I was really Kool-Aid swilling, rocking and rolling. And then it wasn't so crazy either. And then it got crazy. And in mid-98, I had studied the structures of markets enough. And I moved half my equities out. I just went to safe haven and said, there's just something wrong here. And then almost to the day, we sort of marched our way into the Asian crisis. And I said, you're either a genius or an idiot. I'm not sure which, because you left half exposed and you got half out of harm's way. and I swore I'd get the rest out if it came back, and it came back. So by mid '99, I was selling my Dell and Warner Lambert and WorldCom and Rational Software and all these companies, BMC Software. My old roommate in college was Goldman's software. He started their software group, a guy named Rick Sherlin. And so I was getting some pretty good information out of him. And then I emptied my portfolio completely out of equities by mid '99. And the NASDAQ was rocking, making me look like an asshole. And I went into gold. I went into gold cash, and I actually went into the Prudent Bear short fund, which I've done twice and done well twice. I will never do it again because I shouldn't be shorting. That's a fool's game. But so I was buying gold from 290 down to 270, and then I couldn't take any more pain. But I had a standing offer at the local coin shop. Said, look, you get a couple ounces of gold, I'll pay you cash for it. And for about the next 7 years, up to about $4.57 an ounce, I bought gold. And funny story. At one point, he said to me, it was actually at $4.57 an ounce, and he said, "Don't you think this is the top?" He knows I'm going to buy it, so he doesn't care. I said, "No. How many guys are buying gold from you?" And he said, 4 total. And I said, "And the other 3 are friends of mine, right?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I sent them to you, didn't I?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Does that sound like a mania to you?" And he said, "No." And so in any case, and then I carried the gold all the way up to 1900. In the early 2000s, the best analysis I ever did is I bought Philip Morris. And the analysis was right. So the fact I made 700% on WorldCom I'm not proud of it because I didn't know what I was doing. But the Philip Morris, I knew what I was doing. I really did it right. And so I did well by that and the various tobacco stocks. And then I also went into energy. I tried to go into commodities. I talked to Jimmy Rogers' partner for about 2 hours. And I talked to a market maker in the Rogers Commodity Fund. It was too sketchy for me. I don't like sketchy, and it would have been fine. So I just went into Fidelity Commodity Equities. I just started buying, the funds that had all the big cap oils and stuff. And so although I actually had years at least 1 year in the 90s where I made 100% plus return, and that's the exposure to the market. And this is where it's crazy. This shows you it was a mania. I was 150% exposed. And so I made like 150%. And so but my best decade was the 2000s. And it was not the best decade in terms of absolute numbers, but while equity investors were getting ravaged by a couple of serious bear markets, I compounded 13% a year from January 1st of 2000 to December 31st of 2009. And that kind of got me on a bit of a map. People I wrote about it and people noticed it and said, "Oh, wow, that's different." And then I wrote about the subprime crisis on May 6, 2002. Now, I wasn't seeing this. I don't do spreadsheets. I was just picking up from guys like Bill Gross and Josh Rosner and guys saying, "Look, we got a subprime crisis brewing here. They're really, General Electric's going way out on the risk curve. This is nuts." And the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were looking sketchy. And I wrote about in 2002. I told my class. I occasionally blurt shit out to the class for no reason. And in March of 2007, I turned to the class. I said, "The banking system's about to collapse." And the indicator was 2 things. One is the market ABX index was dropping. That was the derivatives market. And no, mainstream press wasn't watching it, but the bloggers were saying, "Wait a minute, this thing's just going down, down, down. What's going on in there?" And I don't know if you know this woman, a woman named Tanta. She was blogging on it. Her name was Doris Dungy. And the old veterans will know this. She was Seeking Alpha or something. And she was talking about, she says, you don't understand the chaos underneath the surface in the pipes of the system, what's happening. And that's when, they were selling squares and cubes and stuff and CPDOs. It was just crazy time. And so I did have a prudent bear short for that downturn, but I would have been bolder, but I didn't trust counterparty at that point because I was really a doom and gloomer at that point. And so, so what amazed me is it really took 2 more years after I could hear the market crack. And this is what people don't understand. They hear this cracking noise, and that's the market breaking, and they think, well, okay, but nothing happened, so we're fine. I go, no, that's the first of many, many noises that you're going to hear over the next few years. And so I was confident. I was so liquid. And at the bottom, I bought some more tobacco, but not much of anything because I was convinced there was another factor of 2 in the downturn. And because we had done so much damage, and what I didn't see coming, and at best I can tell no one on the planet saw coming, was $30 trillion, right? So there's people who said, oh, I saw it. I said they do anything they have to. I go, show me your blog where you said 30 trillion. Because I remember when they bailed out, the Bear Stearns for 30 billion, and it sucked the oxygen out of the room. It's like, holy moly, what just happened? Wow, that's scary. And that's just chump change, right? That's just a bad day in some regional bank now. And so I just, and I'm not, and of course you'll hang on to the gold because if they're going to dump 30 trillion, but somehow the inflation didn't catch, and it's because they were basically shoving it into the Federal Reserve as reserves, and so it wasn't getting into the paws of the people, and so it wasn't going direct, as they say. So I really missed the inflation thing. I thought inflation should have gone wild. So I was basically liquid gold. I had the energy till about 16, which I overstayed my welcome there. Started going back in 20, thanks to Jesse Felder, and thanks to kicking Exxon out of the Dow. I said, you kick Exxon out of the Dow, replace it with Salesforce.com. I'm buying Exxon. That's real straightforward. And but not a big position, big enough that I care, but not big enough to really, it's not life changing. And so I've been, sort of compounding 4 or 5% a year through a decade where everyone else is partying like crazy. And so I've got people saying, you're such an idiot. When are you going to admit you're wrong? But there's one metric on Wall Street that is never going to be broken, and that is that the valuations of the market will mean regress, and the markets are. Yes, absolutely. True? Yes, I do.
Now, so one of the ideas that I see circulating online, and I don't know yet all of the nuance surrounding it, but I think the main idea is QE and what they did in 2009 broke the market. And now you have this world where anytime there are going to be these market drawdowns, they rush in, they're going to, kind of outlaw bear markets, outlaw recessions.
Right.
And because of that, the historical valuation metrics are harder to use to evaluate today what is overvalued and what is not overvalued. So how do you kind of balance the macro environment may have changed, the tools they use may have changed when you're using those valuation metrics?
Well, so to make the assumption that the valuations are never coming down means that you will own investments. Let's say we're 150% overvalued. So the markets are priced to make 40% of what you would if the markets were priced at fair value. So there's a plot in my year in review. I've got an even better one that Ron Grice sent to me that shows the S&P over the last 100 years corrected for M2 money supply, which is a far cleaner inflation metric. then, and I don't think he's published that. That's the funny thing. I think he just sent that to me. I'm not sure. And I don't know if I've been watching for it. I've never seen anyone else publish it, but what it shows is that if you correct the markets for M2 money supply, which seems like a stunningly clean way to correct for inflation, over the last 100 years, the markets have drifted downward slightly. Now, so the conclusion that I drew from that is that all you got were dividends. So now, back at 100 years ago, markets were returning 6.5% yield dividends, and now they're returning 1.5%. So if you want to say the markets are going to stay up at this price, you have to say, and therefore I'm going to get a return of about a third of what I would have normally gotten. Now, he sent me a modified version of the plot in which he did the total return. And the total return turns out to be, over the 100 years, 3.79%. That is the dividends, right? So that's it. So my claim that it's all dividends, that's what the average dividend was over that period. Now, the interesting thing is that that Buffett, in his iconic 1999 Fortune article, said that after you're all done, and by the way, his Grice's plot does not include taxes and fees and shit. It's just the market index. So you take a 3.79% return over 100 years and start pulling that other shit out of there, you're hurt. I mean, you're really hurt. Buffett said the most you can ever hope to get by the time you're done unwinding everything, but he didn't include taxes, was 4%. Now, everyone says, "Oh, Warren Buffett knows everything," but then they ignore that 4% part, and so that's about right. That's what Grice's plot shows, and that's what Ben Graham said years ago. And Ben Graham said, "Look, stocks and bonds are going to return the same over a long period." Ed Macquarie followed up on that same thing. So people have an expectation, which, as you know, since you suffered your way through this damn thing. As you know, for the last 40 years, the markets have been on a roid rage. So the recency bias is not from 2000. It's not from 2008 or 9. It's not from 2000. It's not from 1987. It's from 1981. And it turns out the most stunning statistic from 1981 is that the market valuations, this is getting to your point, the market valuations, which are inherently inflation corrected because it's the price divided by something that attract, like GDP or sales or revenues or Tobin's Q or whatever. Case-Shiller. It turns out that they compounded a little over 3% a year for 40 goddamn years. That means you had a 3 point something percent tailwind from the low of 81, where you couldn't give that shit away, to the high where people would buy any piece of shit that moved. So then the question I asked rhetorically is, what happens over the next 40 years when that 3% turns into a negative 3%? And it will. I just don't know when. But it will. I mean, there's a sort of a, if you go back to ancient Rome or something, you'll find there's a margin of return that's modest, but it's above inflation. That's what you demand. You're not going to ask for inflation payment. You're going to ask for something a little above, and if you're priced to get almost nothing, then you'll get almost nothing.
So you essentially in the letter say that you divorced equities in 99 and you married gold in cash, right? Right. When you look at that, there's a whole new generation of people who actually agree with your thesis and say, you know what, I want to hold some cash to spend, and I want to hold some sort of asset that will benefit from this inflation that has sound money principles. Right. They seem to be going towards Bitcoin, not gold.
Right.
Each time we've talked, you've had a little bit varied view of Bitcoin. How do you think about it now?
Well, I know an awfully large number of smart people who are enthusiastic about Bitcoin. What keeps me away from Bitcoin, people don't understand a couple things. One is I'm a bit of a Luddite, and Bitcoin is a digital asset. And I don't even trust the damn cloud. right? I don't trust. I have trouble with it. I've had cloud storage screw me up, and I password problems and stuff like that. So I find, and at one point I couldn't get stuff out of box. I put a bunch of important stuff in box. I couldn't get it out, and they said, "Oh, by the way, you're over your limit. Now you got to pay for more storage." I'm going, to get my shit out? Are you kidding me? So Bitcoin, I know I can hear all the Bitcoin guys going, "Oh, but they can't touch us." I go, I kind of don't. First and foremost, I don't need the hassle of having to worry about the tech behind Bitcoin. Now, I think if I spent huge amounts of time reading about it, I would come to terms with it. But it's still a digital asset to me. It's still something that I could imagine somehow when they finally suck me. If I go into Bitcoin, one could argue that's when you guys should sell. Right. And every hodler out there seems to want me to go into Bitcoin. I'm like the holdout or something. I don't know what it is, but boy, they all go at me. And they're civil. I think the hodlers are, I think they understand that I'm sympathetic. The second thing is I am confident that at some point you guys are either going to be absorbed by the state or do battle with the state. And that's a capital S state. And you haven't yet, right? That day is in the future sometime. And, so once in a while you hear a Yellen or, Christine Lagarde or someone say something that's sort of a shot across your bow and you guys flip her off. And, but at some point, I think you're going to have to do battle with the state. I think it's going to be epic. It's going to be Battle of the Bastards, I call it. And you guys are going to win or lose. I'm not interested in participating in that battle right now. It hasn't caught my attention. Now, Lynn Alden made one of the more interesting cases. She kind of presented it as the equivalent of stitching diamonds in the hem of your clothes, escaping some totalitarian regime, and you have your codes, right? You have your codes. And that I'm more sympathetic to, except I'm too old to be running from, I'm the old guy who's sitting in the middle of Kiev going, "Fuck you, I'm not moving." Right. So
one of your big themes is that the totalitarianism is increasing all around us. And to a degree, it's already here, right? Especially in this kind of digital overlords. So it's surprising to me that
I know
you are sympathetic, but also you don't want to buy it.
Well, so the other problem is I wouldn't go, it'd be very hard for me to picture going in deeply enough to be life-changing. So I did this great analysis of Philip Morris, and I made a lot of money over the years. But it's not life-changing. If all those, I bet on Russia's the RSX index 2 days before. I had owned it for several years. I wasn't alone. Grant Williams was interested in it too, and Cuppy and these guys. But 2 days before it went south, I said, I'm taking a flyer on it. And I bought it. And then it went to zero, right? It might come back. I don't think so. I think by the time it comes back, JP Morgan will find a way to steal my RSX. But at the same time, there's no way I would have gone deep enough into it to really make a killing, because I don't do it that way. I average in over time. So I could average into Bitcoin over time. People say, what price would interest you? It's not about price. It's about the battle with the state and the annoyance of having to worry about my codes and shit. It's not interesting to me. I'm sort of gonna hang with gold, and I have physical gold, and so I'm Bitcoin light by that model. I'm a godler.
So let's talk about some of the topics that you covered.
Okay. And there's a third one that I haven't completed writing on, which is the darkness. It's total dark lord shit. But go ahead.
I saw that in January 2024, the third part will come out. So
if I can finish writing it, it's so painful to write. I don't know, but go ahead.
All right. Digital totalitarianism. You have a section, you say, we are already being ruled by algorithms and our future is offering up authoritarian CBDCs, digital IDs, facial recognition software, and carbon budgets, all enabled with AI. It is a march towards digital authoritarianism. Is there any way to stop it? Or is this just like a foregone conclusion?
I don't think so. So the troublesome thing is that the basal level, not even humans trying to get us sort of level, but just the creep of every time you use your credit card or every time you go through security at the airport or whatever, you're handing a decision over to an algo. And it's going to say yes or no. It's always binary. Yes, let them through. No, kill them. Whatever. And every time you put in your credit card, it says yes, you get to buy that item, or no, you don't. And I gotta confess, I'm annoyed when I have to go find my phone to log into some website because they want to do the double password shit. And I go, this site's not that important to ask me to do that. My bank account's fine, but this site's not worthy. And so we are going to increasingly ask computers to make decisions for us. So my wife has health problems, as you know, and I have to go through all these health portals, and I'm reading my own lab reports and shit. And I made a joke, I thought it was funnier than shit, about how you're going to do your next colonoscopy using a robotic gerbil fitted with a GoPro camera that you run off your iPhone. But medical care is getting like that. And so we're every time you hand over one time I was on a help call. I was talking to a helpline. And I'm really sympathetic to what it's like to be on the end of one of those, right? Because everyone's always pissed off about something. And I lost my shit because I kept saying, look, I don't understand this word that you're using. And then I got off the phone after having lost my shit. And I thought, were you talking to a computer? Because it felt like it was circling around. And I realized, I said, you're talking to AI computer. And I don't want to talk to an AI computer. I don't want to read a blog not knowing if it's written by AI or a person, right? I don't want to read AI blogs. I think there are times where an AI write-up on something would be instructive. But we can end up in a point where everything online is just AI. And by the way, it turns into gibberish fast when it's just AI. Someone mentioned that recently where they said when AI is feeding off of AI, it spirals out of control real fast. Now, they might fix that. But I'm right now reading Michael Malice's book called The White Pill. It's a stunningly good book. It's about the Soviet Union and how awful it was. And you're left with this, do not let that happen here. So here's the short story of this book, just to get your attention. We know that Stalin killed 40 million. What no one knows, or very, very few people know, is how. What transpired while 40 million people were getting killed. He didn't just line them up and shoot them in ditches. It was society completely imploded on itself. And it just went completely toxic. And somehow was created by first Lenin and then Stalin. But the message is very clear to me. Don't let that happen here. And you can see it happening here. Now, we're miles and miles from that. Maybe the US and the Western world doesn't have the Russian DNA, like cultural DNA, to ever go there. But it's possible. And I'm infuriated with the current administration, who seems to have no respect for the Constitution. And you can say, oh, he's just a right winger. No, I would be appalled. I didn't support. I went totally negative on George Bush when he got us into Iraq. No, I'm not just a right winger, but this administration is totally throwing the basic principles of who we are under the bus.
What are some examples?
The border. Let's start with the border. So they're just letting people flood through the border. I'm not against immigration.
And let's unpack this, because I think that there's a big portion of the audience that they understand kind of what's happening, right? They see the videos online, etc. Why do you think it's happening? Do you think it is a conspiracy that, they've come together and they said, hey, we should do this because, I've seen theories that it'll increase the number of people who vote Democrat, all the way to the other extreme, which is just like, no, this is a complex problem. People are incompetent. And therefore, rather than try to come up with a solution, they just say, screw it, let whatever happens. And that leads to, hundreds of thousands of people come across the border every year. Like, which do you think it is?
That one I don't believe.
Okay,
I don't even see a token effort right now. If you listen to that liar press conference, press secretary Karen, what's her name? She's out claiming right from day one they tried to get control of the border. There's not a shred of evidence, not a shred. So no, they welcomed everyone. They could shut off the border. They could have done it. They fought Trump the whole way when he tried to do it. There's a benign interpretation. One benign interpretation is that someone's watching Peter Zeihan and saying, we need more people. And Zeihan is, this demographer who's a neocon of a higher order, but he's a demographer. And he says, look, we're at 1.6, population replacement, which means we're going to have trouble. We're going to have a terrible time, but not as bad as other countries, but we're going to have a terrible time. And so one could argue that someone has a twisted view of how to solve that problem. That's the most benign. It looks to me like it's an attempt to destroy the concept of a border. So it looks to me like it's a globalist move. And if, there's two nationalists in the world who are really devout nationalists that you can name. There's more, but there's two who really stand out. And the two are Trump and Putin. And who's getting the most guff, right? Trump and Putin. And so I would say that that the United States stands between the globalists, the guys who really do want to have a borderless world for some reason that I don't quite understand, except for power. Power is everyone seems to want. And so you destroy the borders, right? And you get, I used to laugh off the Soros arguments, but then he starts, he's been helping place DAs and stuff. And, the January 6th to me was one of the most heinous periods. Post-January 6th was the most heinous periods of American history, that we've locked people away for years for having gone to a protest. And I can hear people screaming, going, no, they did this, they did that. No, they didn't. Those were feds in the crowd. The crowd, nothing was going to happen without the feds intervening at January 6th. Nothing really bad was going to happen. And then, there's 40,000 hours of tape and they still won't release it. But whenever they do, you go, holy shit, that guy didn't do anything. And you got how many years in prison, right?
So I don't know if you know who this person is. Felix Somari.
I know the name.
The Raven of Zurich. This took me months to track down. And for those that don't know, he was very well respected he was able to call a number of market tops, bottoms throughout the world wars and became somewhat of a trusted confidant of many bankers, economists, etc. And in the book, he has this story when he was a young kid. I think he's like 12, 13 years old. There's a shoemaker that he's talking with, and the shoemaker has an accent. And he's, a shithead 12-year-old, right? He starts making fun of the guy's accent. And his dad basically slaps him and says, hey, we don't do that here. And in the book, he claims that from then on, he was immune. I think the exact quote is, I was immune to the virus of any nationalism.
Right.
And so I think
nationalism doesn't require, though. We have states, right?
Yes.
I don't sit there and look at the guys in Pennsylvania and say, oh, those fucking Pennsylvania douchebags. It's just a way of organizing society.
So break down the difference between what I think some people see as like nationalism driven by hate and a zero-sum game versus kind of more the organizational things, the pride of being from a nation, what I would consider much more innocent view of the importance of nationalism, not so much a zero-sum game, but maybe actually a positive sum game.
This episode is brought to you by Auradine. They are a brand new startup led by a number of Silicon Valley legends who just raised $81 million to build the future of internet infrastructure. You're probably wondering what that means, so let me explain. There are numerous new disruptive technologies that are being adopted simultaneously. from blockchain to artificial intelligence to zero-knowledge technologies. In order to ensure that these technologies thrive in this new world, we need new infrastructure, and that is where Auradine comes in. They just launched their first product line called Teraflux, which is a Bitcoin miner powered by the world's first 4-nanometer silicon chip technology. These air-cooled, single-phase and dual-phase immersion cooling miners have unrivaled speed and efficiency. They have superior uptime, and they leverage a brand new innovation called Energy Tune that allows miners to dynamically adjust the energy consumption and Bitcoin hash rate based on demand response needs of the electrical grids. Auradine is an ambitious company working on hard problems. I'm really impressed with them. And if you want to check out more, you can go to auradine.com. That's AURADINE.com. Go check them out at auradine.com today.
Well, so as you, I've read a lot of anthropology, for example. I love history. As society got bigger, right? We went from, a dozen guys running through some jungle in Borneo to, or across the savannah to bigger groups like 150. You start picking up structurally different societies by necessity, right? So the pure anarchists just don't get it. You have to somehow start building structure. And I think there's kind of a natural evolution of structure. And so at this point, the nation state is kind of the natural structure for the current world. And now the globalists might say, yes, but we're heading away from the current world, and therefore we should go to a globalist world. But it's also a world that they want to run. And that's, I have a quote in there where someone says, follow people who are trying to find the truth, be wary of those who actually think they found it. So the nation state still, to me, makes sense. And I don't want some guy in Brussels telling us to not eat meat, for example, which is the stupid shit stuff they're already pushing, right? So already the globalist view of the world is looking so stupid, evil, some combination of the two, that I don't want anything to do with it. It just doesn't make sense. I actually think in some sense, one of the reasons why I'm a pro-choice guy, but Roe v. Wade in some sense makes sense, because I don't see why Mississippi should necessarily have to follow the same moral values as California. They're really different populations in a profound sort of way. And I know that Roe v. Wade happens to be a highly charged issue, but there's still little sort of states' rights mentality in me, and I don't think we should. I think there's a lot of things that should be at the state level. But I see things happening on a daily basis that seem so evil to me. Like now, there's 2 states that have tried to keep Trump off the ballot. The woman in Maine, I did a tweet the other day that got a lot of support. I said, should she be tried for depriving both us and Trump of our civil rights? There are crimes in which you deprive someone of their civil rights. That's how they convict some people on stuff. And I said, if she takes him off the ballot, that's depriving me of my civil rights. And so I think she should be convicted. If it turns out the story that we're being told is correct, right? That always comes back to that. For all we know, it's a fake story, for Christ's sake. For all I know, a robot wrote the damn thing. It was truly unbelievable to me that the Colorado Supreme Court, for example, could take him off the ballot. These are supposed to be super learned judicial people. And I think a 5-year-old could explain to them why they made a mistake. I mean, I think I could explain it. I used to go home from faculty meetings and talk to my, son who was like 7. Say, Thomas, here's the setup. Boom, boom, boom. What do you do? And he'd say, here's what you do. And I go, yeah, my colleagues don't seem to see that part, And so the fact they took him off a ballot is, to me, truly extraordinary. And then you have to say, but it can't even be for the reason that it appears to be, right? It's not. There's something else altogether. If it was a Republican court, I'd say, well, they're trying to generate support for the guy. Because it sure as hell, I'm voting for Trump, period. I want to see him get in there and go Green Goblin on him. I've just lost my shit at this point. I want him to get in there and cause trouble.
There's context here that I think if people haven't read the year in review, they need to understand. In 2016, I think you say you begrudgingly voted for him, or were
very reluctantly, cautiously.
Right? And then in 2020, you were kind of agnostic. Explain a little bit as to why were you cautious or, kind of reluctant in 2016? Why agnostic in 2020? And now I hear both in the letter, but also from you, it sounds like a much more kind of hardened, heels dug in, I'm voting for him. What is that evolution like?
Well, so the first evolution was I had been aware of Trump the developer, Trump the narcissist, so in 16 when he ran, I said, this guy's just Looney Tunes, right? Now, I actually had read an article written in 1984 about him as a developer. It was really interesting because everyone found him beyond annoying, but he always got the deal. They'd say, everyone wanted that piece of real estate. Somehow Donald got it. And I can't understand how he did it. And people would say, after a while, you just say, Donald, just tell me what you want. And that's how he works. Right. And I watched a documentary recently and he built a huge office complex one time and he didn't get any of the signatures. My wife's gone, oh, that's so criminal. And I go, that's chutzpah. That's not just criminal. That's a guy who really, and the concrete workers were on strike, but his building was getting concrete. And you go, oh, that's because he's in with the mob. He's such a bad person. I go, he's getting the job done, right? And so there's always those sort of two sides to Trump, and I watched him knock off 13 Republican candidates. I'm going, boy, that was impressive the way he did that, even though someone referred to it as incompetent. And I go, he just knocked off 13 people, right? Now he's going against Hillary, right? No one else could have done that. That's not incompetent. It's extraordinary. So I could have voted for Bernie over Trump because I thought, he's generic. They'll neuter him. He can't do any damage, although I'm not positive that's true. So Trump gets in office. You'd be hard pressed to name something he did that was really bad. You really would be hard pressed. You're going to, he's a liar. I go, no one ever lies in DC, right? Trump's a bullshit artist. Biden's a liar. They're different. Trump will say, I caught a fish this damn big. And Biden will say, I graduated from this college, first of my class, and he didn't graduate from that college, right? One's a lie, one's bullshit. And so I had no trouble voting for him in 2020. But I wasn't sure I wanted more the chaos. I was thinking if Dems could come up with a candidate and bring us back to earth a little bit, that would be okay with me. And then watching what they've done to him over the next 4 years, I go, okay, let's elect him. He knows where the spoons and forks are. He knows when he first got into office, he couldn't build a cabinet. He didn't know who to trust. He couldn't trust anyone from either party. Neither party wanted him in there. He now has his war cabinet. And I want to see him do it. Now, it could get ugly, but it's not his fault. Not in my opinion.
So I have heard stories through the rumor mill of people who either worked in the administration or know Trump that when he first got into office, there would be situations where, he's sleeping at night and he would get a phone call. And so the staff member would come in and say, excuse me, President, I'm sorry to wake you up, but there's a general on the line in Iraq, Afghanistan, wherever. And basically they were calling and they needed the president's approval for, a strike, very similar to Obama having to give the final order to go after Osama bin Laden and things like this. And supposedly Trump would be like, was he a bad guy?
Right.
Okay, we'll kill him.
Right. The simplicity of it. I mean, there's, and he's not stupid. If you watch his documentary, you watch the things he did, people think, wow, he's totally uncontrolled. He went to military academy. He was a leader at the military academy. I mean, he's not the loser he appears to be. He's idiosyncratic. That's different. And so, and you would be hard pressed to for me, one of the drop dead issues that allowed me to vote for him the first time was he said we have to get along with the Russians. And I said, he's dead right. And then, of course, they hang Russia collusion all over him, and they got nothing. They got, the Durham report gave a little bit to everyone, but when you got to the bottom line, he explicitly says we found no collusion, period, none. And I think it's treasonous to make this shit up the way the Democrats do. I think that if you really, I don't know what the formal definition of treason is, but in my skull, I have a definition of treason. And when you're, to me, it's pretty close to a coup d'etat when you're doing the shit they did against them. And it looks to me, the Biden administration itself looks like a coup d'etat in the reverse sense. I mean, they're doing shit like when Biden was told by the Supreme Court you couldn't cancel student loans. He just tried to find another way to do it. What do you do when the president ignores the Supreme Court? They can't just have to rule on him every day. At some point, they got to be able to say, no, Joe, Brandon, whatever your name is, stop. And I don't care how many right-wing Supreme Courters there are. That's sort of the bottom line for me. And so, I think the Biden administration has been truly horrific. And I think the January 6th Stalin-Lenin show trial component of January 6th is a horrific chapter in history. And I have friends who say, you do the crime, you do the time, right? And I go, well, first of all, show me the crime. Second of all, you know how I defend a January 6th person? It turns out your brain chemistry changes in a mob. Temporary insanity. You could get psychologists who'd say, yes, temporary insanity plays. But there wasn't shit done. It was feds in the goddamn crowd doing the shit. And so I see things that are so non de Tocqueville, so anti to everything that the sort of fundamental principles that we used to think we stood for. Maybe I was just dead wrong. There was some bad shit at the turn of the century in the United States that was happening, some really non-constitutional things. And so that's what's got me angry. And the problem is it's not making me happier. And it's also, I don't see where it's getting me closer to some sort of solution. So that's the problem.
Let me ask one last question on politics, and we'll go on to some of the other topics. It sounds like you believe Trump will win. Yes or no?
Oh, I don't know. No, I think they'll rig the election.
Okay.
They did the first time. 2020 was rigged. 2020 was rigged.
Explain your logic for having so much confidence in that now.
Well, first and foremost, I think there's plenty of evidence. Second of all, most importantly, the one that I go, look at both parties, by the way. No one wanted him in the White House, correct? Neither party wanted him in the White House. They did everything imaginable, 2 impeachments, indictments, you name it, to keep him out of the White House. Is there any chance? They said, oh, but we can't rig the election. You want to bet on that one? No. It's insane to bet on that one. Of course they rigged the election. They've been rigging it for years, but it's kind of a capture the flag rig. Whereas, dinking around over here, they stole Pennsylvania from us, shit like that. This was a wholesale rigging under the guise of the COVID lockdown and the mail-in ballots and all that shit. And Kerry Lake has a great case for the rigged election. And if you dig into the Smartmatic voting machines, it turns out through a series of shell companies, they trace to Beijing. I mean, it's a colossal mess. And the problem is there's no evidence they're going to ever run a clean election. They'll run a clean election when they don't care which side wins. Then they'll let it be clean. But we know we all hate these guys, right? We know we'd vote every last one of them out of office. But they have a 97% reelection rate. That's not rigging. That just shows you the hopelessness. The Democrats' super delegate model is an abomination, right? The fact that 30% of the goddamn delegates come from insiders who get to just vote however they're told to vote. That's just staggeringly. But it turns out that if you look at the structure of political parties, they're just non-for-profit organizations. The only way you'd stop the Democrats from doing what they do and the Republicans from doing what they do, I think, if you, let's say you wanted to stop it, I think you'd have to charge them with some sort of RICO charge and say you fundraised under pretenses. Pretenses means false, it turns out. I just kind of realized that. Under pretenses. You committed fraud by raising money the way you did. That's how I would go at them if now, on the other hand, who wrote the book? God damn it, I can never remember the name. Someone wrote a book about the legality underlying the court actions underlying the 2008 to 9 crisis. And they talked about all the cases that they built against Wall Street guys. In some appeals court would spend 3 hours looking at the data and throw it out after they'd spent months building a case against them. So no one went to jail, right? Nobody. A couple of little guys, couple of Indian guys from a hedge fund, right? Yeah, get the Indian guys. Why not? We don't care about them. And so I just see criminal treasonous levels of behavior from a system that I don't remember showing that.
Let's talk about climate change, which is another topic that I think you explicitly said climate change is a scam in the letter. Explain what you think is going on there.
Well, I have to go back a few years. I've got an email trail, which I've got people pestering me about it. And I'm saying, look, all my friends believe it. The scientific community believes it. I don't know where you're going with this, right? I actually was sitting with the Secretary of Energy one day and told him I was agnostic, and he flinched. I said it would take me 10,000 hours to figure it out, so I'm not qualified to cast a vote. My brother and some other guy pestered me into digging into it. And I finally, out of frustration, I said to the other guy's name, David Walker. I said, as far as I know, there's no credible scientists who don't believe this story. And I have to sort of go with the science, right? This is pre-Fauci. He said, oh, yes, there are. I said, send me names. So I expect him to send me names of people from Sheboygan State College of Fine Arts, and things like that, and that they're not going to be credible. And they could know, but if I'm going to overturn a globally accepted theory, it's going to take more than some guy from Sheboygan, right? And he sends me about 20 names of people who were at elite institutions. So I go, okay, but they're probably a bunch of climate scientists who said this model sucks or that model sucks, and therefore, we got to redo them. And the deniers are turning that into, therefore, there's no climate change. So I start Googling them, and that's not what they're saying. So you hit guys like, right away, you hit Richard Lindzen, former head of the National Academy of Sciences, geophysicist at MIT, says it's the biggest hoax in history. And you go, whoa. You find out the American Physics Society put together an elite panel of a dozen guys, said, you're charged with looking into this, and they all came out deniers. They all said this is just crap science, just total crap science. From that group emerged, Freeman Dyson, right? That guy's one of the legends of physics. Will Happer, I think, was on that committee. I'm not positive. But so I can name for you Nobel Prize winners in physics that say that it's totally a farce. So a guy like Richard Koonin wrote a book, and I think he thought he could have an effect. It's not about science, but he was on the committee. And so he wrote a book. And what he does is he kind of tries to tightrope walk where he says, man influences climate, but, and then he proceeds to torch it. Now he's internally inconsistent because he says there's not a snowball's chance in hell that the scientific community has the capabilities of predicting the temperature 100 years from now. And here are the 10,000 fucking reasons why. Here are all the things they can't account for. Physicists at Stanford says the error bar on their numbers 5 times the number. There's that the former founder of Greenpeace says this is a complete farce. The guy who ran the NASA satellite program monitoring temperature said it's a farce. You find out that some of the big climate change guys are compulsive liars, pathological liars. And And then you start picking up the little tidbits, like, the melting glacier. Oh, Dave, look at the melting glacier. And you find out that underneath that glacier are 1,200-year-old trees, which means they grew there 1,200 years ago. And therefore, the glacier is not melting after 1,000,000 or 10 million or 100 million years. It's just going back and forth, oscillating. I saw a headline that said they hasn't been this warm in 600 years. I go, let's rewrite the headline. It was this warm 600 years ago. And then you see the picture of the starving polar bear. If there's anyone watching this who doesn't have the image of that starving polar bear on an ice floe, looks pretty emaciated. And you find out the world's expert on Arctic mammals says that the polar bear population has tripled since the 70s. The world's experts on the Great Barrier Reef say the reef oscillates back and forth and it's not climate. The increasing salinity of the ocean turns out didn't hold up. That got blown out of the water last year. This year's winner, the Nobel Prize in Physics, said that it's such a farce. They can't even account for clouds. Clouds, you know how important clouds are in influencing the Earth's climate and the sun's radiation. And so what you find is I got to sit down with Konstantin Kaysin for about an hour this fall. He's the guy who gave the talk at the Oxford Union. And if you haven't watched it, you really got to watch it. And I said to him, when you started digging into climate change, how long did it take you to figure out that it was a farce? And he said, a couple hours. It's that bad, actually. And so what you discover is the 97, and Michael Crichton picked out this one, the 97% consensus number, which they all cite, lying their asses off. You lying motherfuckers. If you're a climate person and you cite that number, you're a lying motherfucker. That came from a ridiculous study of a bunch of papers where they took several thousand papers and looked in the abstract, which I'm okay with. And they threw out all the papers, which the abstract wasn't definitive, and said what percentage of the abstracts that made a definitive statement said it was a crisis. They said 97%. Well, it turns out it was 77 out of 79 papers out of thousands of papers that they threw away most. Crichton pointed out, he says something like 0.4% of the sample size was used to come up with 97% of the 97% number. So they're lying, pathological lying. If you're a climate scientist, you quote that number, you're a liar. I'm calling you out. You're a shithead. Okay, I'm that angry at it. And I called the guy. There's a debate here. And I walked up afterwards. I said, you're lying about that number. You cited it. You're lying. And he was hemming and hawing like crazy. And I said, you got to stop doing that. So I'm calling out the serious climate scientists and saying, if you don't clean up this community, and if you don't start challenging shit, we're just going to throw you all away. You're just going to end up on some dust heap with all the vax guys who supported Fauci. So, yeah. So And by the way, Kunin's statement about how man-made climate change is real but not a problem, and then he proceeds to make the case you can't possibly predict it. He's contradicting himself because he should never say man-made climate change is real if you can't possibly make the prediction. So I saw Thomas Sowell talk about it the other day, and he points out a very important one. He says, that one alone, I'm waiting for an answer. I'm not getting it. And that is, if you look at, 300,000 years of the CO2 content of the ice, which you can get out of Greenland ice cores, and the temperature, which you can get various ways, which I believe they know how to do it, that there's an 800-year lag. So you take the two curves, which they correlate beautifully, visually. If you look at this plot, you go, look at that. CO2 correlates with the climate. Well, there's an 800-year offset. CO2 rises 800 years after the temperature rises. And they're trying to say CO2 is causing the temperature to rise, when in fact, no. What happens is the temperature rises, the oceans degas, the CO2 comes out of the ocean, and the CO2 content goes up. And they just lie. They just ignore that. And then the Middle Ages. So Happer, I saw a Happer interview the other day, and I did a climate change podcast with a guy who's been following this shit since 2007. I said, here's the killer question. I said, do you know, and this guy I think is honest. I said, do you know any solar physicist who believe the man-made climate change story? He says, no, not a one. He's been doing podcasts writing about it since 2007. Not a single solar physicist believes the climate model. And so Happer starts talking to me, says they're now changing all the numbers from the past. They're just going back and rewriting the numbers and backfilling. And so what was called the medieval warming period, when it was warmer than it is now, they're trying to rewrite those numbers to make it cooler. So he says the numbers from the past are now changing.
When you see so many people convinced, or at least saying publicly one thing, but you're coming to a different conclusion, what is the information or what is the data that you think could convince people to see it the other way that are not in the scientific community? Or do you think that this is one of those arguments where logic succumbs to this like fake morality and people then believe, oh, to be a good person, I have to believe this thing regardless of what the evidence suggests?
So it's both categories.
Okay.
I think there's sound thinking people that have simply never asked. And if you threw the data at them, I've given several talks on it. No one has ever come up to me and challenged anything I presented. So I think there's people I could convince. You give me an hour, I could convince them. I could just show them shit after shit after shit that just doesn't make sense. Scandals which the scientists claim they admit they lie because they got to keep the narrative going, that sort of thing. Then there's the group that, have you read Eric Hoffer's The True Believer?
No, I have not.
It's a brilliant book. I know we all get told what books to read, but this is a brilliant book written in 1953, and it's about mass movements. So it's kind of an early version of Matthias Desmet's more recent book, which is also a good book. And the true believers are sort of the standing army, the people, the foot soldiers in movements. And they typically in these movements, you've got early thinkers, the guys who put forth an idea, like in the social justice shit, the early thinkers were guys like Herbert Marcuse and his wife and stuff like that. And they put out the idea sort of in the abstract. And then you get the movers and the shakers. And what happens is the army, it's not a very flattering view, but the guys who sort of run the ball, really carry the ball, blocking and tackling, are typically serious losers, as described by Hoffer, who have very little to show for their lives. And he says that what that does is it tees them up for two things. One is that they say, well, anything would be better than what I'm experiencing. That's how you get people to sign off on socialism and things like that. And by becoming part of a movement, you become more important. You become the true believer, and you now have a sense of purpose. So I threw out a few barbs about climate change to my class, and they landed like bricks. My brother pointed out, he says, it's like telling some Muslim that Muhammad's a pedophile. It just doesn't work. It's not going to work. And then I realized, yes, because the kids in my grad course now have been told by every authority figure since daycare right to the present that it's a crisis. What it is it's a $150 trillion grift. And everyone who wants a piece of that pie, and when you have a $150 trillion pie, there's a lot of people who want a piece of that pie. They'll all sign off on it. I got colleagues, my opening 3 paragraphs of my grant proposal to the DOE is about climate change, right? They're not going to come out and say, look, climate change is bullshit, but I want money. There are no unfunded climate deniers. There are no funded climate deniers. The Darwinian selection has cleaned the scientific community absolutely pristinely out of all the people who would question it, because they no longer have money. They no longer therefore publish papers. They no longer have a say. So they no longer have a seat at the table, which is exactly, by the way, what they did with COVID and the vaccine.
When you see the oil companies getting added to like the ESG index and Tesla being taken out, is that just a signal that even the people who would not normally be associated with ESG, they're really good at lobbying, they're really good at spending money,
they're just grifters. They're just grifters. That's Larry Fink trying to get Vanguard money, right? The ESG, or they're globalists, right? Again, the climate change guys want to tell us what we can eat, what we can't eat. They want to have our phone have some app that tells them we've used up our carbon allocation for the year or for the month, and you can no longer buy steak because you've used too much carbon. It just these are people. There are polls that say that something like 60% of college kids nowadays are basically socialists. They have no understanding of what socialism has done throughout history. Not a shred of an understanding of how not only has it not worked, but it kills people by the countless numbers. Now, capitalism has bad days, but usually that's when capitalism is turning into socialism, right? Or fascism, actually. So when capitalism goes bad, it turns into fascism because they commandeer the machinery of government. And then they go destroy the hodlers.
Another topic that you write about is biological males competing in women's sports.
I haven't written yet, but yes, I'm going at it.
Yeah, well, you at least mention it in in the first part. Talk a little bit as to less about maybe how we got here, but where do we go from here? Is like one of the concepts that I'm really interested in is there's a number of things, immigration at the border, whether it is, biological males competing in women's sports leagues, all these things, they have momentum. And to reverse momentum, there's only a couple of ways to do it, right? There's some kind of awakening. I think, kind of the lockdowns were an awakening for some people, and they literally picked up and they moved to other states. Like there's gotta be some extreme external thing that forces it. Or there also can be one or a very small group of people with the backbone, the courage, the leadership skills, the communication skills, et cetera, to stand up and, basically educate folks and say, hey, look, this is not what I agree with. I'm in a leadership position. I'm going to change it. But outside of those two things, like how else can the momentum be stopped and potentially reversed?
Well, so the challenge, the reason I'm not optimistic is because they can come up with new things to screw us faster than we can debunk. And I don't like the word debunk in general because it assumes that you already know the answer and you're going to collect the data to show the answer. And but so let's say we win. I think the transgenders in sports is going to die a natural death because it's so stupid. It's insane. So when I write about it, I'm going to write about two things. First, I've got notes and shit on all this. First of all, I'm going to point out that if you're a legitimate transgender, you have my sympathy because it's a tough world, and it's hard enough to be a teenager. You can be the captain of the football team, and you still have self-doubts because you're 16 or 17 years old, 18 years old, and you can be the hottest chick on the planet. You still think your ass is fat, And so it's in an age bracket where self-doubts are just everywhere. And the problem is you have these adults who themselves are suffering from, transgender by proxy. And they're telling you, oh, your problem is that you're actually a female and we can make you happy. And so it's a sucker bet. So the two things I'm going to go against is one is doing medical interventions on teenagers. I'm already seeing that starting to collapse because I think the liability insurance for the medical system is now starting to soar because the hospitals that are doing transgender surgeries and injections and stuff are starting to get their asses sued off. And I want to see them destroyed because I don't think you should ever let a pre-adult make that call. And you say, well, what about their parents? And I go, we don't let parents tie their kids up in the basement and beat them either. If we get wind of it, society will step in on that one too. And so, and they say, what if they think they really feel like they're a woman? I go, well, when someone says, I'm fat and they're anorexic, we don't let them identify as fat. We say, no, get them fucking help. And so this idea that someone who thinks they're female, and then you get, middle schools with 50 transgenders in one middle school. This is not a medical problem. This is a social movement, right? And which is fine. It's a little embarrassing when you're in a fraternity years later and your friends find out you spent time in dress in, 8th grade. But when we're sterilizing them and doing bad things and the horror of horrors is the fake vaginas. I think those people are spending the rest of their life in extreme agony, is my understanding. They just don't work. And it's the adults doing it, I think, are when the Swedes first started doing it, I think it was the Swedes, they spent several years working with the person to make sure that they really were a good candidate for some sort of transgender treatment. And now it's as little as an hour chat with a shrink, and next thing you know, you're getting injections. And maybe these injections don't hurt you, but I've read just too many articles saying that, it sterilizes you and it's not reversible and you have to keep doing it. And so there's just no way we should be doing this to kids. And they say, well, but if you don't do it young, then I go, I don't care. I just don't care. I think that doing something such an intervention on a teenager. And I think we're going to look up 10 years from now and there's going to be a bunch of adults who transitioned and they're going to be saying to their parents, where were you when I needed you? You needed to be my parents. You need to say, whoa, 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 slow down. Go ahead, wear a dress to school. That's great. Go ahead, let your hair out, braid your hair. I don't care, but no, we're not going to castrate you. And so there's that. And then there's the sports, women in sports. When Title IX showed up, there were two noticeable things. One is women started getting opportunities in sports they can get, and a number of men's sports were destroyed. So I happen to have been a gymnast in the old days, and most gymnastics teams got wiped out. Wrestling programs got wiped out because they needed to somehow find a way to equate the two gender sports. And the lawyers on the campuses concluded it was money spent or something. And so they wiped out men's sports to bring them down and elevated women's sports. Now, I've also coached two collegiate sports, both gymnastics and taekwondo, and both have women's components. And I see what sports do for women, and it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Taekwondo especially. Taekwondo is way better for the women than the men. It's not because it teaches them to be killing machines. It teaches you to have composure when someone's smacking you. And to say, look, if it doesn't actually hurt me, it's not a problem, right? If they actually damage me, it's a problem. But it's not a problem that someone's in my personal space. I have to deal with them. But you learn, that's what it teaches you how to. When I used to do Taekwondo, I was a little older, and I used to go right into range and use all defense. I'd spar against the Cornell kids. They were good. They're second in the nation. And I'd go right into range, let them smack away and defend. And it would drive them nuts, actually. They go, he's in my face constantly. And I would just block. And then I'd wait. And then all of a sudden they'd kick me 6-7 times without scoring a point. I'd see an opening, I'd smack them. And it worked pretty well. And women learning that. Now you've got this thing where women have gotten their sports, and now you're saying, oh, now let's guys compete now. Let's let guys compete. So and what I'm stunned by is the entire female sports establishment is not standing up and saying no. And Riley Gaines, I think she probably triggered the beginning of the end. She's been doing battle, and she said she had so many people behind closed doors without putting their names on it saying, I support you, keep up the fight. And at one point, the head of the NCAA said that. She says, I'm fighting you. Why would you say that? I'm fighting you. I asked a 3-time Olympic medal winner what her views were, and I watched her tighten up. And I realized I just asked her a question that almost wasn't fair, because if she answered it honestly and somehow it got out, she'd be kicked off the team. And that shouldn't be happening. But I think we're getting to the point now where women are bailing out of sports. There was a jiu-jitsu championship tournament. There's tons of these things where something like all the weight classes were won by dudes. And I'm going to call them dudes because I don't give a fuck. And there were actually divisions that were all dudes. But at some level, I think some of these guys who are the most appalling cases are actually guys who are trying to destroy the idea. So when the weightlifter says, I'm a dude, I'm a chick, and then he breaks the world record, he's jamming it in their face. So I'm not sure that they're all bad. I think they're doing the right work. So,
well, Zuby is. I think
you must have been an athlete.
Example.
I can see it in your face. You're chiseled. What sports you do?
I played football, basketball, and baseball in high school.
Right.
And I mean, look, there's also I don't think people quite understand the difference of athleticism, even between I think it was college. In college. Certain sports would play other sports in their sport, and
right.
without passing judgment, there are certain sports where the people are bigger, faster, stronger, more athletic, and yes, they can use those components to make up for the lack of finite or kind of nuanced skill. So if you take
right.
a football team and you go and you play soccer, right? Of course, the soccer players are better at all of the skills that are needed for soccer, but if you play for a certain amount of time, there's a good chance that some of the football players may actually be able to score quite often
because they're just
bigger, bigger, faster, whatever, right?
One of the most famous lacrosse players of all time was Jimmy Brown, the running back.
Yes.
And he used to put his thumb on the ball, it turns out. I knew the head coach. But can you imagine being a midfielder and having Jimmy Brown running at you with the ball? You would just send up a smudge mark, right? So, the other thing, it turns out the women's Olympic hockey team practices by playing against prep schools.
Yes.
Boys prep schools.
Yes.
Right?
Now, we've seen this, I think, Clay Travis. I think I saw he's the guy who issued like $1 million bet. He said, I'll pick, the best men's high school team, and they'll go play a WNBA team or whatever.
They'll
and
mop
so,
them
like,
up.
Again, that is the extreme, somewhat zero sum. I'm really trying to make a kind of a bombastic, point by doing this. But to your point, we actually can just look at what the teams are doing themselves. And I don't think that it's a positive or a negative, right? I have a daughter. I don't think that there's certain sports that I would want her to play if I knew, like, what is she going to go play football? Right? If she was like, hey, Dad, I'm going to go sign up to be a running back, I would be like, let's make some different choices here, right?
And by the way, we're not going to do transgender surgery on you either, right? Now, in fact, my son was a pretty good skater when he was real little, and I sort of waved him away from hockey because I decided that the hockey culture was kind of toxic. The parents were toxic. But I don't think I'd want a kid to play football as much as I understand. The head risks are there that are serious enough that, probably 75% of them now own Bitcoin. So, we know they're demented.
When you start thinking about 2024 and beyond, there's a lot of problems in the world.
Right.
What's the positive view? What passes your filter as to, like, these are the things that are going right?
This episode is brought to you by Cal.com. What do I have in common with Chad Hurley from YouTube, Toby from Shopify, and Alexis from 776 and the co-founder of Reddit? We all use Cal.com instead of Calendly, and we are all early investors as well. Cal.com is leading the charge of scheduling platforms in the open source sphere, offering you the chance to harness the efficiency previously reserved for elite corporations and tech gurus. If you like to have your calendar organized and be able to have an efficient exchange when scheduling, but you love all of the benefits of open source technology, then Cal.com's for you. They are transforming sophisticated calendar management into an accessible tool for all via a user-friendly interface. You can customize it and you can make your calendar work for you. Use code POMP for $500 off when you set up your team with Cal.com today. Again, go to Cal.com, CAL.com, and use code POMP to get $500 off when you sign up. Cal.com, an open source tool that allows you to take back control of your calendar, be efficient when scheduling, and make sure that no one can steal your time.
Well, again, Crichton's very good on this one too. If you remember back in the 60s, it felt like the world was collapsing around us. The Vietnam War was going on. To the older generation, they were watching their kids. All of a sudden, they discover free sex with birth control. They discover drugs. Rock and roll sounded awful to them. Elvis Presley wiggling his hips. And, so they went from Bobby Darin and Annette Funicello to the Doors very quickly. And you had the civil rights violence in the cities and stuff, and so double-digit inflation was soon thereafter. So there's always tough times, and so you have to remind yourself that this is not that different. Again, Michael Malice's book reminds you how bad it can get. There's nothing in the United States that approximates what the Soviet Union was doing to its people. Anywhere, pick the worst place, Camden, I don't care. There's nothing. And so I have to remind myself of that. I do think we're heading into a period of tumult. So the Great Depression lasted what, a decade? I got an argument with a Stanford economist. I think it was Stanford. I said that the Great Depression didn't end until after World War II. He said, well, and I talked about restricted consumption and things like that. And he said, yeah, well, but it turns out the GDP showed that the Depression had ended during the war. And I spent some time pondering it. And I said, no. Because your GDP was a false GDP. You were creating shit and blowing it up. Right. So if you to me, gross domestic product needs a depreciation rate component built into it. So if you make a blender the last 40 years, your GDP is better than if you make that same blender, but it only lasts 5 years because it breaks. And that's one of the missing. So you didn't produce the wealth making the chintzy blender that you did making the good blender. And so during the war, the depreciation rate of everything was phenomenal. We were making battleships were getting sunk, and we were making planes were going down, and we were weapons and ammo, and it was just very costly. But you can't count that as GDP. And here's a GDP point that you might have picked up, you might not have. Tell me that's Robert Gordon's book.
You suggested this to me 2 years ago.
Did you read it?
It's one of the best books. I've told tons of people about it. For those that don't know, The Rise and Fall of American Growth, and it basically makes the argument that was it 1870 to like 1940, I think is the timeline. There's tons of innovation. There's tons of GDP growth. My favorite example, well, two of them. One is the elevator and the importance of building urban density by one simple invention.
Running water, electricity.
I was going to say the second one is every home is completely disconnected, in 1870. And by 1940, they're all connected. Roads, electricity, phone lines, the whole thing.
Orville Wright lived long enough to see jets. Wrap your brain around that, right? People talk about Amazon being pioneering. Amazon was not pioneering. The Sears Roebuck catalog was pioneering. Sears Roebuck catalog was Amazon. Yes, it took a couple weeks, not a day, and it wasn't anywhere near as big. But we went from guys buying, flour out of barrels in country stores all over the country to ordering shit and having a train deliver it to you. Sometimes you could order prefab houses and stuff, right? You could order all the car parts you needed from the Sears Roebuck catalog, and so that was just Amazon. And Amazon's just a more digital version. And the other thing that's really interesting is remember the part about primary versus secondary invention. So electricity would be primary, and a vacuum cleaner or a dishwasher or something would be secondary. The best decade for secondary inventions was the 1930s. Right in the middle of the Great Depression, we invented more secondary inventions than any decade. So we created wealth during the Great Depression. And here's where we're going to be lied to in a very big way. And I hint at this, I kind of talk about it a little bit this year, where as the boomers get older, we're going to spend a fortune on healthcare. And that's going to go into GDP, when in fact, it is the cost of keeping up a rapidly depreciating asset. So it is the cost of struggling to keep an asset that's trying to go to dust from going to dust. That's not gross domestic product. That's depreciation. But it's going to show up as GDP.
When you think about the national debt, we're at 33 trillion on our way to a gazillion. We could try to grow our way out of it. That is
not going to happen.
It is a option, but I know you don't think it's going to happen. What would have to change in order to be able to do it?
I think we're already past the fail-safe point. So I think we already have the commitments, the social programs and the Social Security and the military. It's not, we'd have to drop our military to zero, and Kennedy might do that, but he's not getting in the White House. And what do we grow? The debt grew last year 10%. So that's a death spiral. There's not a shred of evidence that the political system has any sort of backbone in it to stop that spending. We spent $200 billion on Ukraine. What if I were Powell? I'd be livid. The guys who say Powell's beholden to the administration, I go, Powell, I would think would want to wring the neck of the administration as he's trying to get control of monetary policy, and their fiscal policy is completely out of control. And so I think we're past that point. I think you could, there's a town in California that had a water problem. It's a good example of a more general principle. And they said, we got to cut consumption 20%. There's no question you can cut 20% consumption of water anywhere. There's no question you can do it. At the end of the year, they had cut 3%. And so we don't do it. We will drive the car off a cliff like Thelma and Louise and clean up the pieces later. And so what I can't picture is how it resolves. So it will resolve, right? It doesn't just stop. It's an infinite loop, right? It will resolve. But I can't picture. They say, well, we're going to inflate it away. And I go, have you noticed how mad people are at inflation right now? We're just warming up if that's the model. We are just warm. I went to get a roast at the store yesterday. Now, I'm not sure what the roast was they tried to sell me, but I said, yeah, I'm looking for a roast, a pretty big one. And I point to one. I said, tell me that one right there. How much would that cost? And he puts on the scale and he says $240. I go, what? I said, I think we'll have a boneless turkey instead. The inflation rots societies, and it's making people grumpy. And there's people going to the store, and remember 5 years ago, you'd see some article that would say, 50% of the population doesn't have money in the bank to cover a $400 emergency. Where are they now? Right? They don't have a penny. They swallow that $400 in 6 months, that margin of error. So paycheck to paycheck is not even true anymore. Now it's paycheck to credit card to debt to whatever. It's not like you can refi your house, right? So we've milked that lactating cow down to bone dry.
One of the most interesting stats, and I wrote about it the other day, is I basically said the financial markets are like the crouched lion, right? They kind of sprint from faraway land, get close to the prey, crouch down, inch closer, and by the time the prey realizes they're there, it's over. And it feels like financial markets have been doing that. But probably the best example is single family homes in America have been going up, even though interest rates are at over 5% and mortgage, 30-year fix went over 8%. And it's on a national level, at least, exactly the opposite of what everyone told you was going to happen. And
well, I think it's a broken market though. So there is no price to, so there's they call it a tight housing market, but it's only tight because those who want to sell and those who want to buy can't see eye to eye. So there's no price discovery. And so the people who have the 3% mortgage simply won't sell because they don't want to then end up with a 7% mortgage. And so, but at some point, people have to sell. Boomers, again, rapidly depreciating asset. Their rapidly depreciating houses are going to be sold by rapidly depreciating boomers. And who's going to buy those McMansions? Not Barry Sternlicht. And I did a pretty good job, I think, this year of laying out the rise of the permanent capital purchasing of houses and how they made a business model out of buying single family homes, which is a terrible business to rent single family homes, by getting them on fire sale in 0809, by hiking rents like crazy, by getting the capital to leverage the shit out of it. I read somewhere that Blackstone or BlackRock, I can never keep those two separate, was getting money at 0.15%. So you take a terrible business, you lever the shit out of it, you make a razor-thin profit margin on a hugely levered portfolio. And then, well, what would hurt this business model? Well, rates rising. And rates have risen. So I figure that we are about to see explosions all over the real estate market. And why they are not yet audible is unclear to me. But they have to, because the cost of buying a house just doubled. And so you either have to buy half the house or pay half as much or something, but it just doubled. And you know what it's like to buy a house. You sit down with a realtor. They say, how much money do you have? What's your annual income? This is how much you can afford. And your wife says, that's what we're buying. And so if the realtor says, that quantity is what you can afford divided by 2 now, because everything costs more, then who's, round numbers, the real estate market has to cut in half.
Will they ever let that happen? Or will they step in?
Yeah. No. They have to let it happen. No, because then we'll have an inflation problem. Remember how Twitter used to be loaded with people saying, oh, I'd love inflation because that'll make my mortgage cheaper? How's that working out for you guys? Is your mortgage any cheaper? And the answer is no, because your wages are as sticky as your goddamn mortgage.
So I had a guy, Joe McCann. He's a former macro trader, worked at a place that you would know. He's got a partner who worked for a very well-known billionaire investor, managed hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, each individually. They now run a fund that's focused on the crypto market. And one of the things that he said to me is his friend said to him, and now has kind of become his calling card, that essentially the government and the Fed is in a precarious position. It's either full-blown depression or dog coins to $1 trillion. That's right. That's kind of their optionality. And so a full-blown depression actually sounds way worse than dog coins to $1 trillion.
But crypto is highly inflationary.
Correct.
The introduction of crypto. That's just a lot. It's not if you own it, right? It's an inflation hedge if you own it. But it's highly inflationary to the system, because what's it worth now? $2 trillion? Is that a round number? Good guess.
Something like that. Yeah.
Call it $2 trillion. That's $2 trillion that didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
That came from zero, right? That came from scratch. There's some upfront costs buying servers and stuff like that. I remember when guys were mining crypto on their telephones. Mm-hmm. Right? That was how easy it was in the olden days when only nutballs like Max Kaiser were buying it. I turned it down at 10. $10 a coin.
But I
And
think that there's a difference between like Bitcoin being kind of, digital gold, whatever. And I think, macro investors saying like, okay, cool. If I see gold, this is the digital version. Like I can wrap my head around that. What he was really talking about was like the craziness, the absolute insanity of Dogecoin going up to, $50 billion or whatever.
Right.
And it was kind of this,
but that doesn't create the wealth, right? That in itself is a fictional. It's just it's not wealth creation, it's wealth aggregation. It's just shifting wealth.
Yeah.
And it's at some point you have to create wealth. It's at some point the entire system is based on wealth creation, aka Robert Gordon's book. Not just, Nvidia is going to be on a milk carton at some point, right? Nvidia is priced 5 times what Sun Microsystem was priced at before it did a 95% swan dive. Nvidia is going to be laughable. It's going to be hysterical. It's going to be a chapter of, what not to do books.
So you think Nvidia is going to be one of the poster children for a great crash?
Yeah. Right.
There's a lot of people who disagree with you.
I know. That's why it's so pricey. Right? At the top, let's say the market. So as you know, I make a case for a 40-year secular bear market. Multi-decade bear market. Now, that's to say it won't go up and down. People will be able to trade it. But if you think, well, that could never happen, I go, don't tell the Japanese. They're still underwater 35 years later. And another detail of the Japanese market is, let's say, if you own the Nikkei, you owned 14 of the 20 biggest companies in the world. How could that go wrong, right? How could that possibly go wrong? Well, the guys who own the U.S. market now own the Mag 7. And even Buffett turned on sort of U.S. equities this year. He kind of said, 40 years, some number of years from now, the U.S. will not have the biggest companies. And so I
thought he said never bet against America. What, is he changing his mind?
Yeah. Yes, he appears to have changed his mind because he's looking at the craziness. If you, instead of owning the Nikkei, you just started buying it, you're some 22-year-old Japanese kid who just got out of University of Tokyo, and you started averaging down. It took you 20 years to break even. 20 years to break even. Now, you're doing okay now. But when the boomers have to sell their equities, and they're talking about this big wealth transfer from boomers to their kids, I go, their kids have to buy the fucking stocks that the kids are supposed to get rich on. The boomers have to sell them to someone, and therefore, it's not going to be a wealth transfer without a depreciation of the ticker price, because there's no one to buy it. And so I think we are going to have. I talk about 10 tailwinds that we had from 1981 to the present. And then I kind of cover how those will now be headwinds. And it's not to say it'll happen today or tomorrow or next year or even this decade. But I'm confident that somewhere over the next 40 years, you're going to look up and say, we haven't moved anywhere because we're sitting at 150% overvalued. And if you're 150% overvalued and you tread water, inflation adjusted, you just tread water and say, okay, I'll just buy and hold and wait and let the market come back to fair value slowly. 35 fucking years. 35 years of treading water. You want to go straight down, it's like 68% or something. You want to stretch it out over 50 years, you can get a total gain of about 20%. Compounded, that's like 0.5% over 50 years. Once you are up at these nosebleed levels, there's no safe route home. Period.
Gold and cash, that's it.
Well, and then you've got to somehow beat inflation. So we're in treacherous waters. Someone will do well and they will be deified as the investor of the decade. And it might be a hodler, might be a Godler, might be some guy who found a couple of small companies that are just going to rock. My worst investment ever was I received shares of LabCorp of America in a merger that eventually I didn't know what they were. I knew what I owned, but I didn't know what they were. And so I sold them. They're up 100-fold. That was the worst move I ever made, was selling LabCorp of America. So, but I've done well. I'm if I can tie inflation, I'll do fine. I'm in good shape.
All right. I've got two last questions for you before I let you go. One, name 3 investors that you're impressed with right now that people may not know. Who are the people that you pay attention to what they're talking about, what they're doing? When you've got a question or an idea, you call and talk to them. Who are 3 people that just may surprise folks?
Well, I don't know if they're going to surprise, because a guy who I get a lot of useful information from is Jesse Felder. I get a lot of useful information off a guy who just appeared on my radar about a year ago, but it's not about investing. It's more about macro. It's Peter St. Ange. He's on Twitter. If you're not following him, you should. It's Prof. St. Ange, O-N-G-E. And brilliant macro analyses, snarky as shit, does one a day, very entertaining, rising star. And who do I think really has? I have money with a couple of guys. A small cap investor who I like a lot is Eric Cinnamon. I like the guys at Horizon Kinetics. I haven't given them money yet because I think there's going to be some serious whooshing. I'll tell you what the mistake I made in 0809 was. So liquid. I was so convinced, Einhorn, I think, at least he says he invented the phrase, but what's a 90% correction? Well, it's an 80% correction and then cuts in half. And so if you buy because it's dirt cheap, because it's dropped 50 and then it drops to 75, you just lost half your money. Now, better than buying it at the top. But I started talking about what's the top. The top is some Tuesday afternoon at 2:03. The Nikkei hit its peak. And the peak represents a period of maximum optimism as evidenced by the price. At the precise moment when the justification for optimism is 0.0. You're about to go in through the valley of death for the next 35 years. And no one knows it. So it's like Father Guido Sarducci's coming in and going planet. You remember, do you remember that skit from SNL where he's talking about how you get older and then you get younger, and he says, and you meet this young chick, he's speaking in his Italian accent. And he says, you're 20 and she's a 18 and she's really hot. Next thing you know, you're 22 and she's a 16. And he says, now you're in a big of trouble. And in some sense, the markets are like that. You know where you're at, but you don't know which direction they're going. Now, I'm confident that the markets have big downside as expressed by either serious price drop or seriously long period of just suck ass. And to me, time is my enemy, not price. I would love to have a massive correction. I'd love to have a 3-year drop into the Great Depression. What I don't want to do is, what would suck would be our last really serious correction was 1967 to 81. We lost 75% inflation adjusted, and it took 14 years. Losing 75% is a bitch. Giving up 14 years of your investing life, a third of your investing life, really, to get nothing, to lose that 75%, that kills you. That's what killed the Nikkei investors. Time is your enemy. So time's your friend in a bull market, and time's your enemy in a bear market. I'm predicting a multi-decade bear market where time will be your worst enemy. And I don't know. I think the markets could be uninvestable. I did a spaces with George Noble. What an honor. And I said, I thought the markets would be uninvestable. When he asked me to explain, I said, the Nikkei. And he says, well, you could short. I said, no, you couldn't. It took too long. You'd burn your money to a crisp trying to short the Nikkei because it didn't just drop like a stone. It just worked its way down over about 15 years. You go broke trying to short that thing. So I think the markets could become absolutely uninvestable, besides the occasional lucky person who can cherry pick. But that's a Nassim Taleb, fooled by randomness moment, right? That's where there are going to be in a sample size of 10,000 money managers, there's going to be some who flip the coin heads 10 times in a row. It's statistical. So there will be winners. Are they because they're geniuses? I got to figure Druckenmiller had a special touch. I think David Tepper has a special touch. Dalio, who I think is a hoser, but I read his book and it was very good. It was kind of fourth turning with a greater military and economic component, but he sees us going into a period of great stress and violence. We're right on the cusp of a 15, 20-year cycle. And so
my last question is, you put the books that you read each year at the end of the letters, so people can go check those out. But if you had to pick one or two books throughout your life that really stand out as having the biggest impact on the way you think, the way you see financial markets, or even think about some of the other topics we've talked about, what are like the one or two books that you would suggest?
There's kind of an obscure one called Banking in the Business Cycle, written in 1937. I actually read the original, but then they reprinted it. So you can buy it probably on Amazon by Phillips and McManus, I think. And it was about what really created the Great Depression. And it was an Austrian view. The Price of Time is a modern book that everyone should read. And if, Edward Chancellor is considered God in this world of, credit and crisis. And he says that when interest rates get to 2%, you always have a crisis. Well, they went negative. So, I think Edward's probably watching the tickers with interest. The Great Crash of 1929 is a classic. I think I really like Robert Gordon's book, which we talked about. I really like The Great Believer, The True Believer, which we talked about. Sleeper Out There and the Mystery of Capital by Hernando de Soto is about international markets and international economics and why Africa is never going to be a hub of wealth creation. I'm trying to think what else. I should put together this list. I have at least a dozen years of it, of books. My big advice is audiobooks. When your wife sends you to the store, she's actually asking you to read for 10 minutes each way. When I commute 12 minutes to work, it's 24 minutes of reading. I can get through about 25 books a year just in the car. And you can always get through the book. I encourage people to read history. I read about the Middle Ages. Middle Ages are great, by the way. World Lit Only by Fire. Great book. Very snarky. Very funny. Yeah, but I've read about Roman history, and I've read probably half a dozen books in the Middle East. Nothing stuck. Avoid books that too many names, too many foreign names. I started to read Gordon Chang's book about China, and it was just too many Chinese guys. Whereas Michael Mouse's book about Russia is not. So he avoided that trap somehow. And so I'm partway through it right now, but it's an unbelievable book. How about you? You tell me. Add some.
I would say books over the last, year or so, that I would really suggest. I got a whole list here of ones.
Give us No Coin or the book. If you had one book, you said, "Look, I got one pitch." What's the pitch? I'm going to read Lynn Alden's book.
Yeah, in terms of just a book to read about crypto stuff or Bitcoin.
There must be one that's the
Broken
Bible.
Money. Yeah, it's either
so that's
Lynn
my
Alden,
next
Broken
book.
Money.
That's my next book actually.
Or Saifedean, the Bitcoin Standard. I would say those two are the books. My buddy Jason Williams, he wrote one called Hard Money You Can't F With. That's pretty good too. I like those
Yeah.
three. Let's see, books this year. Barton Biggs, Hedgehogging. You ever read that one?
I think I read that one. That's about 15 years old, I think. That one's got some age on it.
Yeah, the Raven of Zurich is a good one. I really like this. It's called Rules for Aging, Roger Rosenblatt. It's kind of like pithy things that you can do in your life to make it better.
Here's one for you. Millionaire Next Door was very good.
Oh yeah, that is a good one.
I once stood and listened to a guy who I might call kind of a digital friend. I don't know what you call him, where he gave a talk on 10 stupid books, and that was one of them. And I afterwards I said, "You didn't read it, did you? There's no way you read that book." He just thought it sounded stupid. And it's about saving. It's about the psychology of saving. Mm-hmm. So I think if you don't understand that what it's really about is saving, not about investing. It's about saving. So you may have noticed I had an expensive year. I bought my wife a car and I had to do some shit around the house, and I still saved 25% of my gross salary. Right. And so when my kids were in college, I still had a net savings when my kids were in college. And that is the one time I said to my dad, I think I should be saving more. He started to rip into me. I said, well, I'm saving between 25 and 30% of my gross. He said, oh, never mind. Right. He backed off. He thought I was not saving anything. I said, no, but I had to be able to do better. If I was living on a low salary, got some big raises, should have been able to save a huge percentage of that, but your life expands to fill your wealth, right? You somehow find a way. So if you can save 25% of your gross, the rest is noise at some level.
I could not agree more. Where can we send people to find you on the internet if they want more Dave Collum?
Well, I do try to answer emails. They're getting this time of year. It's a bit of a nightmare, but I try to answer them. It's how I met a lot of people. I don't cold called an email like to Rickards or something like that, and they'd answer back. Like, some very famous guy. I just had an email exchange with Jeff Sachs, and he says, "Thank God we're not university presidents, right?" And I'm going, "No kidding." And then I'm at Twitter at David B. Collum, where my pinned tweet is my year in review.
I appreciate your time. Everyone looks forward to this every year, and we will do it again in 2024, my friend.
Adios.